Rain came down on Minas Tirith, as if the sky meant to test the mortar. It slid along the white walls and gathered in the seams between stones, turning the tower's proud angles into something older, something patient and scarred. The city had been built to look upon darkness without bending, yet even stone could not keep weather from seeping into its bones. In the great hall, torches burned steady in iron brackets. Their smoke clung low beneath the rafters, unwilling to rise, as though the air itself had grown heavy with unsaid things. The captains along the walls had the look of men who had learned to listen for trouble in silence. They watched the figure on the floor, one knee down, head bowed, cloak dripping rain, like hunters watching a wounded animal that might still bite. The messenger's hands shook around a leather tube. Mud streaked his sleeves. He had ridden far, and the road had taken something from him that no warm hearth could return. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed, not from drink, but from wind and sleepless fear. Aragorn did not speak at once. He sat with his crown set plain upon his brow. No jewels, no unnecessary shine. The gold of kingship was elsewhere, in duty, in endurance, in the steady willingness to be the one who answered when others wished to sleep. His gaze rested on the messenger until the young man's breath steadied under it. "Rise," Aragorn said, the single word carrying neither softness nor cruelty, only command shaped by restraint. "Tell us what you have seen." The messenger stood unsteady for a heartbeat, then forced his shoulders square. "From the north," he rasped. "From Dale Dói. From the river running and beyond. They send warning, my lord, your majesty." The correction came late and ashamed. Faramir moved as if to offer water, but Aragorn lifted a hand slightly, not denying mercy, only insisting on the message first. The messenger swallowed and thrust the tube forward. Aragorn took it and broke the seal. The parchment within was thick, oiled against wet. He read once, expression unmoving. Read again, slower, the way a man rereads a wound to measure its depth. The hall seemed to quiet around the scrape of paper. Arwen, seated a little apart in the shadow of a brazier, leaned forward by the smallest measure. Firelight picked out the pale calm of her face, yet her eyes had gone distant, as if some far shore had called her name through stone and rain. Aragorn lowered the letter. "They speak of raids," he said, "of wagons burned on eastern roads, of men moving with purpose under black cloth." His voice tightened. "Orcs." A ripple ran along the captains like a chill. Orcs were a word that should have belonged to stories now, or to old scars touched by drunken remembrance. But the messenger's face did not hold the looseness of tale. "I saw their spoor," the young man said quickly. "Not many, but real. And on trees, on stones, on doors, marks burned dark as pitch." What? Mar?" Faramir asked, low and careful. The messenger's mouth worked. "A crown," he whispered, as if the shape itself were sharp. "Thorns, like twisted ash branches." Arwen's fingers tightened on the arm of her chair. Aragorn's eyes flicked to her and back, the smallest exchange of fear between them. Outside, rain struck the high windows harder, and for a moment it sounded like arrows on shields. They left the throne hall for a smaller chamber where walls were closer and secrets safer. The map room smelled of ink and old leather, of parchment handled by anxious hands. A brazier burned low, throwing a ruddy glow across the table where the Anduin lay in drawn lines and the mountains were jagged ink. Faramir spread the letter beside the map and anchored it with a stone. His face was calm, but his calm was a thing he forged each moment, like a blade kept sharp by constant care. "Dale does not frighten easily," he said. "They have lived with the memory of dragons and war at their doorstep. If they send this," he let the thought hang. Aragorn's finger traced eastward, across the blankness where mapmakers had little to offer but guess and rumor. "If orcs move again, someone calls them," he said. "They do not gather for coin." Arwen stood at the table's edge, hands folded as if holding herself together. "Not all evils die cleanly," she murmured. "Some scatter, some sink into stone and soil and wait." Faramir's gaze softened with a kind of reverence and sorrow. He had known elves in war, but hearing one speak of the world's wounds as living things still unsettled him. "Then what is this?" he asked. "A remnant of Sauron's work? A band of men playing at darkness?" Aragorn's jaw clenched. "Sauron is ended," he said, and the certainty was fierce, as if he needed it to be true. "The ring is unmade. The Nine are gone. There will be no Dark Lord again in that fashion." He lifted his eyes. "But men can learn foul craft, and there were powers in Middle-earth before Sauron raised his hand." Arwen's gaze went to the window slit where rain slid down leaded glass. "The three rings are faded," she said softly. "Not destroyed, but their power to hold back decay has passed. Places that were preserved now loosen." Her voice tightened. "If something has been waiting for the world to weaken, it may think the time is ripe." Faramir drew a slow breath. "We strengthen crossings," he said. "We warn Rohan. We send riders north to Dale and Erebor. Ask them to hold their roads and watch their borders." He looked at Aragorn. "And we send scouts east." Aragorn nodded once, curt. "Quietly," he said. "The people have had enough of fear. I will not wake old panic unless I must." He paused, then added, "Send word to Ithilien, to Legolas." Faramir did not blink at the name, though a guard in the doorway shifted, uneasy. The elves were leaving. Some men found comfort in that. Others found a strange grief. Yet the idea of calling them back into trouble felt like pulling on a thread already frayed. Arwen's eyes lifted. "He will come," she said, and the certainty in her voice carried a shadow beneath it, as if she feared what his coming might mean. Aragorn folded the letter again, careful, reverent as if handling a shard of glass. "Tell Dale that Gondor hears," he said. "Tell them they will not stand alone while I wear this crown." Faramir bowed and moved to go, but Arwen touched his sleeve lightly. "Send also to the havens," she said. "If this grows, wounds will need more than bandages." Her fingers tightened slightly. "And ships may carry more than travelers." The word ships hung between them like a gull cry in a stone room. Aragorn's face softened and hardened at once. He reached for Arwen's hand, and she let him take it, their fingers clasping with the quiet desperation of those who knew time was no longer endless. Outside, the rain eased for a moment, and in that pause the city seemed to listen, waiting for the sound of hooves, for the next message, for the first crack of something that peace had plastered over. In Ithilien, rain did not fall like a verdict the way it did on stone. It threaded through leaves and dripped from fern tips with quiet persistence, softening the sharp edges of a land that had once been cut open by war. The green there had returned, but it was the green of a wound that had closed over. Tender, prone to pain. Legolas moved through the undergrowth with the ease of something born to forests. His cloak was dark with wet, his hair damp against his collar. The bow in his hand was not raised, yet felt ready, like a thought waiting behind the eyes. He had built a small haven here after the war, an elven dwelling among men's healing land, and he had watched the saplings grow as if each leaf were a promise paid back to the dead. Damrod crouched beside a sapling that had been half cut through, fingers hovering over bark. "Here," he said, voice roughened by years and weather. Damrod's scar had deepened since the war, but his gaze was still steady. He had guided halflings through these woods when darkness hunted them. He did not frighten easily. Legolas stepped close. On the bark, burned deep and black, was the mark, a crown of thorns, uneven points like twisted ash twigs. The smell of it rose sharp, not like a campfire, but like hair singed on purpose. 3 nights at most, Damrod said. "We found the same mark on a stone by the road to Osgiliath, and on a doorpost near the old crossing. Whoever does it doesn't hide." Legolas touched the edge of the burn without pressing. The bark was cold, but his fingertips prickled as if from nettles. He drew his hand back and closed his eyes a moment, listening past rain, past bird call, past the sigh of leaves. There was something under the ordinary sounds, a silence between them that did not feel natural. The land had its own quiet. This was a quiet that watched. "Do you hear it?" Legolas asked softly. Damrod's jaw tightened. "I hear rain," he muttered. "And I hear men grumbling because their boots never dry." A faint smile flickered on Legolas' mouth and died at once. "This is older than boots," he said. A ranger approached then, breath misting in the damp air. "A rider," he said. "From the city, King's Seal." Legolas straightened. Something in his posture shifted, subtle and swift, like a tree bending under sudden wind. He took the letter, broke the seal, and read. As his eyes moved, the green of Ithilien seemed to dim around him, not in truth, but in his mind, as if the world had leaned toward shadow. "Trouble in the east," Damrod said, watching his face. Legolas folded the parchment with care that felt almost like grief. "And in the north," he said. "Orcs again, a mark carried like a banner, and whispers of craft that should have died." He looked at the burned crown on the tree. "This is no bandit's boast." Damrod spat into wet earth. "So we do it again," he said, not asking. "We watch, we bleed, we bury." Legolas' gaze went distant, toward Minas Tirith and the mortals within it. "We do not do it the same," he said softly. "Because the world is not the same." He tightened his grip on his bow. "Tell your men to watch the roads," he said to Damrod. "And keep your hearts steady. Whatever speaks in these woods, do not answer it." Damrod's brow furrowed. "Answer what?" Legolas' eyes were bright as wet leaves. "You will know," he said, and then he turned toward the path south, already moving, already hearing in the rain the faint echo of ash. Beneath the roots of the great forest, Thranduil sat in a hall carved from living wood and patient stone. Torches burned in iron cups along the walls, their light caught and scattered by polished roots that rose like pillars, twisting into arches. The air smelled of wine and resin and damp leaves. It should have smelled of song. Before the king stood three captains, cloaks dark with mud. In their hands they carried proof, an orc helm dented and spattered, crude iron scarred by fresh cuts. On its brow a mark had been burned deep, a thorned crown jagged as if made in anger from ash branches. Thranduil's pale eyes rested on the mark until the hall seemed to shrink around it. He did not look surprised. Surprise was a luxury for the young. "You are certain," he said, voice smooth as a blade laid on velvet. The eldest captain bowed. "At the forest gate, my king. A band, small, 10, perhaps. They fled from the east, not from the mountains." "Orcs do not flee into my realm without reason," Thranduil murmured. The youngest captain swallowed. "They spoke," he said. "Not the black speech as we have heard it. Something rougher, older. They named a crown." "Nani? Adbara." A murmur stirred among the guards, quickly smothered. Elves did not like old names shaken loose. Thranduil leaned forward slightly. "Sauron is ended," he said. "Yes," the eldest captain replied, cautious. "But not all who learned his ways are dead, and not all evil in Middle-earth belong to him alone." Thranduil's hand tightened on the arm of his throne. He remembered Dol Guldur's long shadow, the way it had made spiders bold and men cruel. He remembered how victory had come, and how quickly the world had wanted to declare the wound healed. "What of Dale?" he asked. "Traders send fewer wagons," the eldest said. "They speak of men moving under black cloth along eastern roads, of wagons burned, of ash falling where there is no fire." Thranduil's gaze drifted, as if he could see through stone and roots to the trunks above, dark with rain. "How many of our people remain?" he asked abruptly. The captains hesitated, and that hesitation was an answer. Thranduil's mouth tightened. "Yes," he said quietly. "They leave. Each year more ships. Each season, fewer voices. He looked again at the branded helm. And now the world dares to scratch at us as we go. A movement came from the shadows between root pillars. A tall figure stepped forward, dark-haired, travel-worn, eyes steady. "My king," the stranger said, bowing. "A message from Imladris." At the name, the room stilled. Imladris had become more rumor than place in the mouths of men, but elves felt it like a faint light in a valley. Thranduil's gaze sharpened. "From the sons of Elrond," he said. The messenger nodded. "They ask what you see," he said. "And they warn that Minas Tirith has heard of the same mark." Thranduil's laugh was short and bitter. "They ask," he said, "as if asking will unmake it." He rose from his throne and the captain stepped back instinctively, as if an old storm had stood up. "Tell them," he said, voice cold, "that my forest is not yet silent. Tell them the East sends orcs under a new brand. Tell them there is talk of an ashen crown, and I do not like the taste of that name." The messenger bowed, and Thranduil's gaze held him for one more heartbeat. "And tell them," he added softer, "that if this is a shadow from the first days, it is not only men's burden to bear." When the messenger withdrew, Thranduil remained standing, staring at the orc helm as if it were a prophecy written in iron. Above, unseen, the forest breathed. Below, the king of that forest felt the world shifting, as if the roots themselves had heard a new axe. Dog Guldur had been broken, but it had not been made clean. Ruin did not mean forgetfulness. Stone remembered what had been spoken in it, the way wood remembered fire. Thranduil had not entered these ruins since the day the last shadow fled, and even then he had walked its halls with bitterness, because cleansing did not give back the years stolen. Now he returned with a torch in his hand and 2 scouts at his side, their blades drawn though there was no living enemy visible. The corridors were slick with damp. Moss crept over black stone as if ashamed to be seen here. Water dripped from cracks and ran in thin streams that caught the torchlight and vanished into rubble. They came to a pillar split by force. On its remaining face, scored deep into the stone, was the mark. A thorned crown. Not burned this time, but carved. The grooves sharp. The dust still pale at the edges. The younger scout swallowed. "New," he whispered. Thranduil lifted the torch, letting the flame's restless light crawl over the carving. He felt a faint pressure behind his eyes, a sensation like standing too close to a cliff edge. The air tasted faintly of ash, though there was no smoke. "Who comes here?" the older scout murmured. "We keep watch. We kept it empty." Thranduil did not answer. He followed faint tracks in the damp dust. Boot prints, heavy, human. Not many. Enough. They led deeper, toward a chamber where the ceiling had collapsed, leaving a jagged opening to gray sky. Inside, a chain lay broken on the floor. The links were thick, forged for strength, twisted as if something had wrenched them with desperate fury. Beside it was a smear of dark residue that did not smell like blood. It smelled like old smoke and singed hair. The younger scout's breath caught. "A prisoner," he whispered. "No," Thranduil said, voice low. "Orcs do not chain their own like this. This was made for something meant to be held." The torch sputtered as a drop of water struck it. The flame flared brighter, then steadied. In that flare, shadow in the far corner seemed to shift, as though it had a spine. Thranduil froze. The scout stiffened beside him, eyes wide. He spoke in clear Sindarin, the language sharp as a bell in the damp chamber. "Show yourself." The air grew colder. The pressure behind his eyes sharpened into a sting. A whisper brushed his mind. Not sound, but thought pressed into him like cold metal. "Ash." The shadow in the corner thinned, as if pulled apart by invisible fingers, and for a heartbeat he saw the suggestion of a face that could not hold shape. Not a creature. Not flesh. Something lost. A houseless one, he thought, and pity rose unbidden. Then anger, hotter, because pity had been turned into a leash. The shadow recoiled from his torchlight and snapped away into cracks between stones, vanishing like smoke sucked into earth. The older scout exhaled shakily. "My king," he whispered. "What was that?" Thranduil lowered the torch. His hand was steady. His heart was not. "A remnant," he said. "And a warning." He looked again at the carved crown and felt his jaw tighten until it ached. Someone is meddling where even fools once feared to tread. He turned sharply. "Seal this place," he commanded. "Double the watch. No one enters without my word." As they left, the ruins seemed to lean after them, listening. Above, rain began again, thin and cold, as if the sky itself had remembered what lay beneath the forest's roots. In Imladris, the rain sounded like memory. It tapped the leaded windows with the soft insistence of a hand that would not leave, and the valley held the sound the way it held mist, gently, without letting it go. The last homely house had not fallen into ruin. It stood as it always had, arches clean, floors swept, lamps trimmed. Yet emptiness had a way of changing even perfect rooms. Chairs sat unoccupied for so long that their carved backs looked like bones. Tapestries hung, their woven wars unchanged, but dust gathered at their edges as if time had decided to mark them. Elrond sat at a long table where once the wise had spoken the fate of the world into being. A candle burned beside him, its flame small and stubborn. Elrond stood at the window, arms crossed, watching water streak down glass like tears that never ended. Between them lay Thranduil's message, the seal broken. "Elves have fought their last war," Elrond said at last, voice flat. Elrond's mouth tightened. "We have said that before," he replied. Elrond turned, eyes dark and sharp. "After the last alliance," he said. "After Angmar. After every shadow we cut down. The world does not learn." Elrond looked toward the far end of the hall, where their father's chair had once been. It was empty now, and the emptiness felt like a verdict. "Our father is gone," he said quietly. Elrond's jaw flexed. "And our sister sits in Minas Tirith wearing mortality," he said. And his voice softened only at the name he did not speak aloud, as if to speak it might make it hurt more. Elrond reached for the sword lying on the table. The leather of the hilt was worn smooth by hands that had bled. "Thranduil speaks of Dol Guldur," he said. "Of a spirit touched." He lifted his eyes. "If someone has learned to bind the houseless, this is craft." Elrond's gaze flicked to the candle flame. "And cunning," he said. "Sauron's shadow was vast. This feels thin, sharp, like a knife in the dark." Elrond felt the seas call like a distant ache, gray waves in dreams. He had thought it would grow until it drove him west, until the straight road took him from Middle-earth like a sigh. But in recent nights, another pull had joined it, eastward, tightening. "You feel it," Elrond said, reading him. Elrond nodded once. "Yes," he admitted. Silence thickened between them, and beneath it was grief. Not only for their father, but for the world that was slipping from their hands, changing beyond their ability to hold. "Do we go?" Elrond asked. Elrond's answer came without hesitation. "Yes," he said. "If men face this alone, they will bleed without understanding. And if our kind pretends it is not our concern, then we carry shame west." Elrond stood. The decision settled over him like armor, heavy, familiar. "Then we ride," he said. Elrond reached for his own sword, sliding it into its scabbard with a sound like a sigh. "To Minas Tirith," he said. "Before rumor reaches Arwen like a knife." Outside, rain continued to fall in the quiet valley. Inside, two sons of Elrond gathered their weapons as if time had turned backward, and the old wars had reached out from tapestry and memory to claim them again. At the havens, the sea never slept. Even when mist smudged horizon into sky, the waves kept speaking against stone and wood, a language older than kingdoms. The gulls cried overhead like restless spirits, and the wind carried salt that stung the lips and cleaned the lungs. Círdan stood on the pier with his hands on a pale beam of timber. The ship taking shape there was small, swift, made for quiet departures. No host, no banners, only a handful of souls slipping away before dawn. His hair, long and silver, was braided back, yet the wind still worried it loose. His beard was salt damp. His face held the weathering of ages the way a cliff held storm scars. Not broken, but marked. A young mariner approached, cloak snapping, and offered a sealed letter. His hands were careful, as if he carried something that might burn. Círdan broke the seal and read. The writing was in the hand of Elrond's sons, steady but urgent, and beneath their words was the shape of fear they did not wish to name. When he finished, he did not move for a long moment. The mariner watched him with unease that was almost childish. "My lord," the mariner asked. "There is trouble," Círdan said simply. "In the east," the mariner ventured. Círdan nodded. "Always," he murmured, and the word held no bitterness, only a weary recognition. "The shadow is broken, but its ashes are not cold." The mariner swallowed. "Will we delay departures?" he asked, and in the question was hope and fear tangled together. Hope, because to delay meant more days beneath familiar stars. Fear, because delay meant the world had teeth again. "I will not bind any heart that longs for the sea," Círdan said gently. "Those who are ready will go, and those who are not," the mariner whispered. Círdan looked east over the land, beyond Linden's fading green, beyond mountains, beyond men's busy roads. "Those who are not may find the world asks one more thing of them," he said. The mariner's face tightened. "War?" he breathed. Círdan's eyes deepened, a tide pulling back. "We have seen enough war to fill the sea with blood," he said. "And yet there are battles not for dominion. There are battles for closing doors that should never open again." The mariner hesitated. "Will you go?" A faint smile touched Círdan's mouth and vanished. "My place is here," he said. He laid his hand on the ship's beam, fingers spread as if feeling the wood's life. "The havens must stand until the last. If the straight road is to remain open, someone must keep the lamp lit." He walked to the end of the pier where a glass lantern burned, sheltered from wind. Its flame was small but unyielding. He stared west for a heartbeat, feeling the pull like an old love, then forced his gaze east again. "Send word to Minas Tirith," he told the mariner. "Tell them the havens have heard. And send swift runners to Linden and any elven havens that remain. If there is to be a last gathering, it must be chosen, not stumbled into." "Then." The mariner bowed and hurried away, boots thudding on wet boards. Círdan remained, the sea's voice rising and falling around him. Beyond sight, ash was stirring in the east like a coal under gray dust, and the shipwright who had watched ages pass like tides felt the world draw a slow, uneasy breath, as if Middle-earth itself had sensed that farewell might not be allowed to be quiet. The council chamber was built for council, not spectacle. Its walls were lined with scrolls and ledgers, the sober record of an age trying to become ordinary. A fire burned in a wide hearth, yet damp still clung to stone as if the storm had left part of itself behind. Aragorn sat at the table's head, maps spread beneath his hands. Faramir stood beside him, one finger tracing river crossings. Across from them sat a dwarf emissary from Erebor, beard braided tight, cloak stained with road dust and forge smoke. Beside the dwarf sat a Northman from Dale, broad-shouldered, wearing fur against the southern chill, eyes sharp with the caution of a people who live too close to old stories. The dwarf jabbed a finger at the map. "The river running," he growled. "We've lost caravans. Not robbed, burned, goods left to char? That isn't hunger. That's a message." The Northman nodded once. "Children wake with ash in their hair," he said. "Old folks say the wind carries voices from the east." The dwarf snorted. "Old folks say many things, but the mark is real." He pulled a scrap of cloth from his belt and tossed it onto the table. Burned into it, rough and dark, was the thorned crown. Aragorn's eyes narrowed. "This has been seen in Gondor as well," he said. Faramir's voice was quiet. Orcs? He asked, though he already knew the answer. A few, the Northman admitted. Not a host, but enough to make men look over their shoulders at night. The dwarf's mouth twisted. Orcs breed like rot, he said. But they don't travel with discipline unless someone holds a whip. Aragorn held the cloth between his fingers and felt its brittle edge. Sauron is ended, he said, and there was steel in the statement. There will be no return of that shadow. Then what is this? The Northman asked, voice raw with honest fear. What do we call it? Arwen spoke from near the fire, her voice soft, yet carrying. Call it what it is, she said. An echo, a hunger that outlived the hand that fed it. The dwarf glanced at her as if caught between awe and discomfort. Echoes don't burn wagons, he muttered, but his certainty faltered. They do when someone gives them tinder, Faramir replied. Aragorn laid the cloth down. Dale and Erebor will strengthen their watch, he said. Gondor will send scouts east and north. We will speak to those Easterlings who have traded in peace. Not all men of the East serve darkness, and some may hate this as much as we do. The Northman's jaw tightened. Some will help, he said. Some will sell your tongue for a purse. Then we choose carefully, Aragorn said. The dwarf leaned back, eyes narrowed. And the elves? He asked, blunt. Your green friend. If this is an old evil, he'll smell it. Aragorn's gaze went distant for a heartbeat. Legolas is coming, he said, and I have sent word beyond him as well. Faramir's hand paused over the map. If the elders stir, he murmured, then perhaps this truly is older than men's understanding. Aragorn looked at the blank east where the map gave up. We will not cry war yet, he said, but we will not be caught asleep. Outside. Rain whispered against glass. Inside, a kingdom that had barely begun to taste peace leaned forward, listening for the sound of hooves. Legolas reached Minas Tirith at dusk when the storm had thinned into a cold drizzle, and the sky showed a bruised strip of violet over the mountains. The city smelled of wet stone and smoke. Torches made pools of light on slick cobbles where water shone like black glass. He walked without ceremony through the lower court, yet heads turned as if a bright, rare bird had flown among men. Some bowed awkwardly. Others watched with the guarded expression of those who had never seen an elf, and were not sure whether to be grateful or wary. Aragorn waited beneath a stone archway that opened into a small garden court, ivy clinging to the walls. When he saw Legolas, the king stepped forward and something in his face softened, briefly, humanly, before the weight of rules settled back in place. You came quickly, Aragorn said. As quickly as the road allowed, Legolas replied. His voice was light, but his eyes were not. Your message carried urgency. Faramir approached and inclined his head. Friend, he said, and the word held genuine warmth. Legolas nodded to him, then his gaze flicked past them to the shadow of a corridor where he sensed, more than saw, Arwen's presence. A quiet heaviness tightened in his chest. Aragorn led him into a smaller chamber warmed by a low fire. Arwen stood near the hearth. In firelight, her face looked both young and ancient, as if she were a bridge between ages and the strain of bearing weight showed only when flame moved. Legolas bowed deeply. My lady, he said. Legolas, Arwen replied, and her voice held a warmth that did not banish sorrow. It is good you have come. Aragorn closed the door. Tell us, he said. Legolas did not embellish. He spoke of the burned mark in Ithilien, the unnatural quiet beneath rain, Damrod's findings, rumors carried by traders. Then he spoke of the north, of orcs crossing into the Woodland realm, bearing the same sign. Faramir's jaw tightened. Then it is spread, he murmured. And deliberate, Legolas said. A banner meant to be seen. Arwen's eyes narrowed. And the unseen? She asked softly. Legolas hesitated only a heartbeat. There are whispers, he said, of spirits touched in dull Guldur. I cannot swear it, but I felt wrongness in the land, as if something listened. Nay. Aragorn's hand tightened on the edge of the table. If this is true, he said, voice low, then we face more than raiders. Legolas met his eyes. Yes, he said, and more than men can sense quickly. He glanced toward Arwen again. It feels like something tugging at the seams, as if it hopes to catch those who are leaving. Arwen's fingers curled, then relaxed. To hold the Eldar, she whispered. Legolas nodded. Or to poison what we leave behind, he said. Silence settled over the room. The fire crackled, and outside the city moved on in ignorance. Servants carrying water, guards changing watch, while within these walls old friendships tightened into the shape of duty again. I will ride north at dawn, Legolas said at last. To Thranduil. Aragorn's face tightened. Already? The forest does not wait for counsel, Legolas replied gently. And my father should not face this choice alone. Aragorn nodded, a king forced to accept what his heart resisted. Go with my blessing, he said, then quieter. And with my worry. Legolas' smile was swift and bright, gone almost as soon as it came. Keep it, he said. It will remind you to watch the east. He left before dawn, when stars still hung like pale nails, and the air smelled of cold rain and iron. Aragorn had insisted on an escort, 6 riders, not to protect Legolas as if he were a child, but to carry messages swiftly if the road bit. They rode north through dark country where the land grew wilder, and the trees leaned closer. Hooded lanterns threw narrow light over mud and roots. The horses' breath steamed in the chill. Legolas felt the change before any man did. The forest's ordinary silence, living, breathing, tightened into something else. Birds did not call, though dawn approached. Wind did not stir leaves. Even the horses stepped more carefully, ears pricked. A young rider near Legolas leaned close, whispering. Do you hear? A howl cut him off, low and ragged. Not the clean cry of a wolf, but a sound as if a throat had been scarred by fire. Another answered. Closer. The riders stiffened. A hand went to a sword hilt. Metal whispered. Legolas raised a hand, palm down. Hold, he murmured. Eyes glinted in the underbrush, pears low to the ground. Warg eyes, wrong light in them. The horses snorted and shifted, one nearly reared. A harsh voice spoke from the dark in a tongue that was not quite the black speech. Rougher, older, like stones grinding. The wargs halted at once. So did shapes behind them, hunched, moving with a discipline orcs were not meant to possess. Someone had trained them. An arrow hissed out of the darkness. Legolas twisted in the saddle, and the shaft thudded into a tree where his head had been. The riders shouted and drew steel, fear making their movements loud. Legolas loosed his own arrow in the same breath. It took an orc in the throat. The creature fell without a cry, as if its voice had been stolen. The wargs surged. The skirmish was short and vicious. Gondorian riders fought bravely, but the forest was not theirs. Branches snagged cloaks, roots betrayed footing. Legolas moved among them like pale flame, arrows singing, then blade flashing when bodies crashed too close. A warg leapt for him, jaws gaping. He met it with his sword, turning the strike so the beast's own weight drove it onto steel. Blood sprayed hot against cold air. The creature collapsed, eyes still burning. Then, as suddenly as they had attacked, the remaining wargs and orcs withdrew. Not routed, called back. They vanished into the trees as if swallowed. The riders stood panting, blades dripping. One clutched a bleeding arm. Another knelt in mud, shaking. Why did they stop? The young rider whispered. We were outnumbered. Legolas dismounted and crouched by the dead orc. On its forearm a mark had been burned into flesh, the thorn crown. They were not hunting, he said quietly. They were testing. The rider swallowed. Testing what? Legolas looked into the darkness where the enemy had gone and felt, faintly, a pressure behind his eyes, as if something far away had turned its attention toward him, curious, amused. "How quickly word spreads," Legolas said. "How ready the roads are, how easily fear rises." He straightened. "We do not linger. They wanted us to feel watched." The rioters obeyed without argument. They rode on, leaving blood to soak into earth that had hoped to grow only green. Behind them, in the trees, the silence resumed. Too perfect. Too attentive. Legolas reached the woodland realm with mud on his boots and dried blood dark on his sleeve. He passed through the forest gate like a shadow returning to its own trunk, and the guards who saw him stiffened as if an old song had stepped from memory into flesh. Thranduil received him beneath the earth, in the hall where roots formed pillars and torchlight made golden patterns on polished wood. He stood at the foot of his throne, as if he had been waiting there for hours, refusing to sit while the world shifted. For a heartbeat neither spoke. Their kinship was not like that of men, not measured by years alone. It was centuries of love and pride and quarrel braided together, tightened at times, frayed at others, never wholly broken. Legolas bowed. "Ada," he said softly, the old word carrying more weight than any title. Thranduil's gaze moved over him, taking in the road's marks, the blood, the tension around his eyes. "You have ridden through trouble," he said. "Orcs," Legolas replied. "And wargs. On the road." Thranduil's mouth tightened. "So it sharpens," he murmured. Legolas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Minas Tirith has heard," he said. "Dale has sent warning. The mark spreads." He paused. "And Dol Guldur?" Thranduil's eyes hardened. "I have seen," he said. Legolas nodded. "Then you know it is not only blades we face, it is craft." Thranduil turned away and paced slowly, cloak brushing the carved roots. "I have watched too many endings," he said, voice low. "Greenwood's innocence, my father, the long rot in the south." He stopped and looked back, eyes pale as winter light. "I will not watch my people be nipped at while they depart, as if we were deer leaving a field to wolves." "You have a choice," Legolas said gently. Thranduil's laugh was short. "Do I?" he asked. "Half my people look west and dream of ships. The other half look east and remember how to draw a bow. I stand between them like a tree in a storm." Legolas' voice tightened. "If we do nothing, the shadow will not spare those who leave. It will poison what remains. Forests, rivers, memories. Men will suffer first, because they cannot see the unseen. But it will reach us. It already has." Thranduil stared at him, and something softened in his expression. Brief, reluctant. "You sound like you have spent too long among men," he said. "Perhaps," Legolas admitted. "Or perhaps I have spent long enough watching men carry burdens that began before their grandfathers had names." Thranduil drew a slow breath. The torches hissed softly. "Very well," he said at last. "We gather, not as in old days, not for dominion, not for glory." His voice sharpened. "We go to close a door." Legolas felt the words settle in him like a stone. Close a door. The phrase sounded like an ending. Thranduil faced him fully. "You will ride south," he said. "Tell Aragorn I will not wait." Legolas nodded. "He will worry," he said. "Let him," Thranduil replied, gruff. Then, quieter. "And you, rest, wash the road from you. Eat." His gaze held his son a moment longer than pride would normally allow. "I would not send you out again with hunger in you." Legolas stepped close and touched Thranduil's arm briefly, an intimacy rarer than embraces here. "Thank you," he said. Thranduil's hand closed over his fingers for a heartbeat, then released as if the touch burned. "Go," he muttered, "before you make me soft." Legolas turned away, and behind him he heard his father's voice already issuing orders. The sound of an old king summoning an old courage from a people who had thought their last march was behind them. Lórien still held gold, but it no longer held enchantment the way it once had. The Malorn leaves shone, yet the light seemed thinner, as if the trees remembered a brighter song and could not sing it without the lady's hand. The air was sweet, but the sweetness had the fragile feel of a scent lingering after the wearer has gone. Celebern walked alone among the trunks, his palm resting on bark as he passed, gentle as if he touched a sleeping thing. He had walked these paths when the world was young, when men were a rumor at the edges of forest. Now men's roads ran beyond these trees, and the age was turning, indifferent to any lord's grief. Caris Galadon lay behind him, quiet. The flets were empty. Platforms creaked in the wind with no laughter above them. Even the water's music sounded subdued, as if reluctant to be heard. A leaf drifted down and landed on his shoulder like a coin of pale gold. He lifted it and held it between his fingers. Perfect, delicate, and yet its veins felt brittle. A messenger approached, one of the few who remained, bowing low. "My lord," the elf said, voice careful. "From the Havens." Celeborn took the parchment, broke the seal, and read. As his eyes moved, his face did not change much. He had learned long ago to keep storms behind his gaze. Yet his grip tightened enough to crinkle the page. When he finished, he looked up into the fading canopy. The sky beyond was bruised with twilight. "So," he murmured. The messenger waited, uncertain. "There is a stirring in the east," Celeborn said. "A mark, a crown." Whispers of spirits touched. The messenger's eyes widened. Will you go?" he asked, the question escaping before caution could catch it. Celeborn's mouth tightened. "I thought my wars were done," he said softly. The messenger lowered his gaze, ashamed. Celeborn shook his head once. "No," he said, gentler. "Do not be ashamed. We all ask the same question now. How do we leave? With clean hands, with regret, with wounds still open behind us?" He let the Malorn leaf fall. It drifted down, turning slowly, and came to rest on earth like a piece of sunlight abandoned. "Galadriel is gone," he said, and the name was both pain and pride. "Elrond is gone. Many are gone. I remain because someone had to close the doors gently, to see the last depart with dignity." He stared east, though the trees hid the horizon. "But perhaps the world is not done asking." The messenger swallowed. "Círdan remains," he said. "He will not leave while the havens stand." "Yes," Celeborn murmured. "Círdan has always been faithful." He turned back to the messenger, eyes steady now. "Send word to Minas Tirith," he said. "Tell Aragorn that Lórien has heard. Tell him." He paused, feeling the weight of the next words. "Tell him that if this shadow touches our kind, we will not pretend it is only men's burden." The messenger bowed and hurried away, cloak vanishing among gold trunks. Celeborn stood alone again. The trees whispered softly, not in fear, but in the slow language of things that knew they were fading. He closed his eyes and, for a heartbeat, smelled ash where there should have been only leaf sweetness. When he opened them, his gaze was resolved. "One more," he whispered to the wood, and began walking as if toward a road he had hoped never to tread again. In Rohan the storm came as wind. It battered thatch and made the hall's smoke twist like a restless spirit. Meduseld smelled of roast meat and wet leather, of horses and hearth fire, and beneath it all, of the wide plains waiting outside. Eomer sat with a cup in his hand, though he drank little. His hair, once bright gold, was threaded now with gray, and the lines around his eyes were deeper. Yet his posture still held the proud straightness of a man born to saddle and spear. Around him, warriors leaned on benches, laughing too loudly at small jests, as if noise could keep the night from creeping close. A rider from Gondor stood before the king, cloak still dusty from long miles, and offered a letter bearing Aragorn's seal. Eomer broke it and read. As his eyes moved, the laughter in the hall seemed to fade on its own, as if the room sensed what his face was becoming. When he finished, he set the letter down with a thud. Orcs, he said, and the word held not disbelief but anger, thick as old blood. Again. The Gondorian rider nodded. Scouts have seen signs, he said, and Dale warns of raids in the east. Eomer stared into the fire, and for a moment his reflection in the flames looked like the younger man who had ridden beside Theoden to death and glory. We swore our sons would not fight the same war, he murmured. A murmur rippled through the Rohirrim, a restless tightening. Peace had not softened them. It had made them impatient, like horses kept too long behind fences. The king of Gondor asks you to watch your borders, the rider said. To be ready. Eomer's eyes narrowed. Aragorn does not ask lightly, he said. He looked around at his men, at the carved horse heads on the beams that seemed to lean down and listen. If the east stirs, then the plains will feel it. Shadows do not respect borders. A young warrior near the hearth spoke up, voice eager. We should ride now, he said. Show them Rohan's spears are not rust. Eomer lifted a hand, silencing him. Not yet, he said. We do not gallop into fog. His gaze returned to the Gondorian rider. Tell Aragorn that Rohan hears. We will send riders north, to the crossings, to the edges of the Emyn Mule. And if orcs show their faces, we will break them. Nay. The rider bowed, relief visible. Eomer's gaze sharpened. And the elves? He asked abruptly. Do they stir? The rider hesitated. There is talk, he admitted. Legolas has been summoned. Thranduil has seen orcs. The sons of Elrond may come south. A hush fell. Even horse lords who scoffed at many fears felt a chill at the thought of the Firstborn taking up arms again. It meant the world's old bones were shifting. Eomer nodded slowly. If the elves ride, he said, then the trouble is older than our songs. He stood, and the hall stilled. We are the horse lords, he said, voice carrying over wind and smoke. We do not hide while others burn. We will be ready. A low rumble of assent answered him, and cups lifted, and spears thudded on the floor like the beginning of a heartbeat. Outside, the storm clawed at the roof. Inside, Rohan began to remember the taste of war. Elladan and Elrohir arrived under a low sky, their horses steaming in cold air, cloaks dark with rain. They rode through the gates without trumpet, yet the city seemed to pause around them. Men turned and stared as if tales had stepped from firelight into the street. Aragorn met them in an outer court beneath the tower's shadow. Guards lined the walls, hands on spear shafts, unsure whether to bow to strangers or to the weight of ages they could sense without understanding. Elladan dismounted first, moving with controlled grace. Elrohir followed, his gaze sweeping the court like a blade. Their travel gear was worn, their boots splashed with mud, yet there was dignity in them that did not depend on clean cloth. Aragorn stepped forward. Welcome, he said, and it was not the warmth of diplomacy but of an old bond. It has been too long. Elladan inclined his head. Too long, he agreed, and the words carried all that had been lost since Elrond sailed. Elrohir's gaze flicked up to the stone steps. Arwen stood there, wrapped in a cloak, pale against wet stone. For a heartbeat she did not move, as if afraid motion would make the moment break. Then she descended quickly, and when she reached them she did not bow as a queen might. She touched Elladan's cheek, then Elrohir's, fingers trembling only slightly. My brothers, she whispered. Elladan's eyes shone. Sister, he said softly, and for a moment the warrior was only a son of Elrond seeing his kin in mortal time. Arwen's faint smile did not hide the shadow beneath it. You have come because the world stirs, she said. Elrohir nodded. We felt it, he said, and the messages confirmed it. Aragorn gestured toward the doors. Inside, he said. We speak where walls hold secrets. They moved through corridors where servants paused and stared. In a chamber warmed by a fire, maps spread, cups waiting untouched, they gathered. Aragorn, Faramir, Arwen, Elladan, Elrohir, Dori. The room felt suddenly smaller, as if too many ages had entered it at once. Aragorn did not waste breath. "Tell me what you sense," he said. Elladan's voice was quiet. "Not Sauron," he said. His shadow was vast, heavy. "This is thinner, but sharper, like a knife in the dark." Elrohire's jaw tightened. "Someone is probing the seams," he said, testing what loosened when the ring was unmade. Faramir frowned. "The power that preserved elven realms is faded," he murmured. "Places that were held are now open to time." Arwen's gaze drifted, as if she heard the sea through stone. "And to those who waited," she said. Aragorn's hands clenched. "If this is sorcery," he said, "steel alone will not mend it." Elladan met his eyes. "No," he agreed, "but steel may be needed to reach the hand that casts it." Arwen's fingers tightened around her cloak. "And if the elves must choose again," she whispered, "then the choice will cost them more than blood." Elrohir's answer was fierce and gentle at once. "We did not remain for comfort," he said. In the fire's crackle, the room held its breath, as if Middle-earth itself listened to hear whether the last of the old guardians would stand up once more, or turn away toward the sea. Night turned the tower inward. Corridors emptied. Torches dimmed. The city below slept, unaware of the names spoken in stone runes. In a smaller chamber lit only by candles and glass, Aragorn and the others gathered close over a map. Red thread ran between stones marking crossings and roads, a spiderweb of worry. The air smelled of wax and smoke, and the faint tang of damp wool. Baranor stood before them, hood pulled low, a scar cutting pale across his cheek. He had the look of a man who had learned how to vanish in crowds, and how to hear what others missed. He bowed quickly, impatient with ceremony. "There is movement along the old roads east of the Anduin," he said. "Not large, but organized. Wagons covered, guards silent, faces wrapped in black cloth." Faramir's eyes narrowed. "Where do they go?" he asked. "Beyond what our eyes can reach," Baranor replied. "They avoid watched crossings. They use marsh paths. They have guides." Elrohire's mouth tightened. "Easterlings," he said. "Some," Baranor admitted, "but not all. There are men of darker skin from further south, and—" He hesitated, throat bobbing. Aragorn's voice sharpened. "Speak." Baranor swallowed. "They whisper of a man who does not age," he said. "A priest, perhaps. A lord. They call him the Ashen Crown." The words fell into the candlelit room like soot. Arwen's fingers dug into the table edge. Elladan's face went still. Elrohir's eyes narrowed, fury tightening. Faramir spoke carefully. "Tales of men who do not age grow in fear," he said. "Yes," Baranor agreed quickly. "But too many mouths repeat it with the same trembling." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "They say he wears a crown of blackened twigs. They say ash falls around him as if the air itself burns." "No. Elladan's gaze flicked to Aragorn. "If this is true," he murmured, "then we face craft older than any petty warlord." Baranor nodded. "There are ruins near the Sea of Rune," he said. "Old stones. The wagons travel near them. Traders speak of chanting at night." Arwen's voice was low. "There are places in the east, the elves remember," she said. "Places where fair words once hid foul will." Aragorn stared at the map's blank edge, as if it insulted him. "Can you go farther?" he asked Baranor. Baranor's jaw tightened. "I can try," he said. "But the farther east, the less disguise helps. A stranger is a lamp in a dark room." "Then you will not go alone," Aragorn said. He looked to Elladan and Elrohir. "Ride with scouts?" he asked. "Not a command, an appeal." Elrohir answered instantly. "Yes." Elladan nodded. "Yes." Faramir straightened. "I will send rangers," he said. "Men who know how to vanish." Aragorn's gaze held him. "Choose wisely," he said. This is not bandits. Arwen's eyes were distant, listening to something beyond walls. If this ashen crown seeks to net the unseen, she whispered, then he will tug at our kind as we try to leave. Elladan's voice was quiet, and it held sorrow like a blade held under water. Then perhaps the world is not finished asking the Eldar to bleed, he said. Aragorn closed his hand over Arwen's in the candlelight. No more, he murmured. Prayer, vow, refusal all at once. But outside the tower, beyond sleeping streets, the east waited, patient as ash. And prayers were not shields. They left Minas Tirith before the city fully woke, slipping out like a secret. Mist lay thick along the Anduin, and the river's breath clung to cloaks and lashes. Eastward the roads grew rough and less traveled, the land turning from plowed fields to scrub, from scrub to marsh where reeds whispered and water hid underfoot. Callan had led them, a lean man with flint eyes and a voice that rarely softened. His rangers moved like shadows, spacing themselves so that if one vanished, the rest would not follow blindly. Baranor rode among them, hood low, silent, his city-born caution stretched tight in wilderness. They found the first sign at midday, the remains of a small fire hidden in a pit beneath reeds. The ash was pale, not yet washed away by rain. In it, scratched with a stick, was the mark. A thorned crown. Elrohir stared at it as if the symbol offended him. They want to be followed, he muttered. Or they want us afraid, Elladan replied. Callanhead rose, scanning the marsh. We move, he said. No lingering. Later, as afternoon thinned, they found a woman stumbling out of reeds as if the marsh had spat her out. Her dress was torn. Her feet were bare and bleeding. Ash clung to her hair like gray snow. The rangers ringed her at once, spears angled. The woman raised trembling hands. Please, she croaked. Callanhead's voice was hard. Who are you? The woman's gaze flicked to Elladan and Elrohir, and her fear sharpened into awe. Are you spirits? She whispered. No, Elrohir said, and his voice gentled despite himself. We are living. Speak. What happened? No. They came, she whispered. Men with black cloth over their faces. They took my husband. They took my brother. Her voice broke. They burned our cart. Not for coin, just to make smoke. She shuddered. They drew a crown in ash, made us step over it, said we belonged to the Ashen Crown now. Elladan felt cold slide through him. Where did they go? He asked. Toward the sunrise, she whispered. Toward the dead stones, where the wind howls even when it is calm. Callanhead's jaw clenched. Did you see anything else? He pressed. The woman swallowed, eyes huge. My mother died last winter, she whispered. But last night I heard her voice in the reeds, calling me. I ran. She shook violently. It wasn't her. It knew my name, but it did not know how to say it kindly. Elrohir closed his eyes briefly, pain flashing across his face. Houseless, he murmured. Callanhead's gaze snapped to him, unsettled. What does that mean? It means, Elladan said, choosing words as if walking near a cliff, that someone is using grief as bait. Callanhead's hand tightened on his spear. Then we cut the hand, he said. Elladan looked east where mist hid everything. Yes, he said softly. But we must find it first. They wrapped the woman in a cloak and sent 2 rangers to guide her west. As she was led away, she turned once, ash still on her hair, and whispered, Please, don't let them take more. Elladan met her eyes and felt the sting of honest helplessness. We will try, he said. Behind them reeds whispered, and in that whisper, names began to form, soft voices in the wrong places, tasting the edges of their hearts. They camped that night in a ruined watchtower on higher ground where Marsh gave way to scrub. The tower had once been part of Gondor's far reach, built when kings still believed they could hold every horizon. Now it was a broken ring of stone, its upper courses fallen inward, its floor strewn with rubble and wind-blown leaves. Callan had chose it because stone could be defended. Yet as night deepened and mist climbed the hill, the tower felt less like shelter and more like a jaw closing. They made a small fire, shielded by the remaining wall. Its glow warmed faces into bronze and made shadows move strangely. Baranor sat close to the stone, cloak wrapped tight, eyes darting into darkness. He had spent his life in crowds where danger wore smiles. Here, danger wore silence. Elrond here walked the tower's edge like a restless spirit, checking gaps, listening. Elladen stood with his back to the stone, gaze outward, feeling the night with senses men could not name. The whispers came after full dark. At first they were only wind threading through cracks. Then they shaped into words, soft, familiar, speaking Baranor's name in a voice that sounded like his mother. Baranor flinched so hard his cup tipped, spilling water into dust. His eyes went wide. "No," he whispered, and the refusal sounded small. "Baranor," the voice crooned, gentle as remembered hands. "Come." Baranor half rose, pulled by longing he hated. Callan had seized his arm. "Sit," he hissed. "That's not her." "It sounds like her," Baranor whispered, tears bright on his lashes. "It sounds exactly." "It is bait," Elladen said sharply. The voice outside laughed softly, and the laugh began warm and ended rasping, like ash scraped over stone. Another voice joined it, speaking Calenhad's name in the deep tone of a man's voice. Calenhad's jaw tightened. His grip on his knife whitened his knuckles. "My brother," he muttered, the crack in his discipline showing for a heartbeat. Elrohir's voice cut through, low and commanding. "Do not answer." The whispers multiplied, each voice chosen like a key for each lock. A lover's murmur, a child's cry, a father's stern affection. The tower filled with ghosts made of sound. Men's faces tightened as they fought an invisible battle not to turn toward comfort. Elladen knelt by the fire and drew a warding sign in ash with his dagger tip. An old elvish mark, not loud, not spoken, but breathed into being with will. The air tightened. The whispers faltered as if meeting an unseen wall. Outside, something moved. A figure emerged from mist, tall, wrapped in dark cloth, face hidden. In his hand was a staff, and on its top was bound a wreath of blackened twigs shaped like a crown. Ash drifted from it in slow, steady fall. Baranor's breath became a sob. Callan had surged forward, rage flaring. "Show your face," he snarled. The hooded figure tilted his head. When he spoke, the voice was like dry leaves scraping stone, broken cinder and twisted into mockery. "So cautious," it rasped. "So wise. Yet you will come east, because you cannot bear to leave your own trapped." Elrohir drew his sword, the steel catching firelight. "You damn them," he hissed. The figure tapped his staff against the ground. The warding mark flared, blackening, as if burned from beneath. The whispers rose again, no longer gentle, now a chorus, wailing, pleading, laughing. Voices made weapon. Elladen felt a pressure behind his eyes like a hand on his skull. He understood with cold clarity. This was not the Ashen Crown. This was a servant. A finger, not the fist. "This is not your master," Elladen murmured to Elrohir. Elrohir's jaw clenched. He did not look away from the hooded figure. "No," he breathed. "The will behind him is farther east." The hooded figure laughed again, pleased. "Yes," it whispered. "Come. Oh. Come where the dead stones remember you." Then mist thickened as if poured. The figure vanished like smoke drawn into cracks. The whispers collapsed into silence so abruptly the absence rang in their ears. Baranor sagged, trembling. Calenhad's breathing was harsh. Elrohir sheathed his sword with a vicious motion. Elladen stared at the blackened warding mark. "He wanted us to follow," he said softly. Calenhad's eyes burned. "Then we do," he growled. Elrond looked east into mist and felt the pull tighten. "At first light," he said. No one argued. They sat through the night with weapons in reach and sleep thin as fog, while outside the dark waited, patient, as if every road already belonged to it. Morning mist lay thick at the forest gate, softening trunks into pillars of gray-green. The air smelled of damp moss and cold sap. Birds called uncertainly above the canopy, as if testing whether it was safe to sing. Thranduil's host gathered without song. Sylvan archers stood in ranks, lean figures in green and brown armor of leather and shaped wood. Bows were unstrung until needed, quivers heavy. Spears gleamed dully, their points beaded with mist. Faces that had once laughed easily now held the solemnity of those who had lived too long to believe in simple endings. Thranduil rode along the line on a pale horse that moved with uncanny quiet. His cloak was dark green, his circlet silver, his gaze hard. He did not look too long at any one warrior, as if he refused to count them as losses before they were spent. Legolas rode beside him, bow at his back. No crown, no emblem, only the silver leaf at his shoulder. His face was calm, but his eyes were bright with the focus that came before blood. At the front, Thranduil raised a hand. The movement was small, yet it stilled even the shifting of feet. "We go east," he said, voice carrying through mist. "Not for conquest, not for dominion, not to reclaim what the world says is no longer ours." His pale eyes swept them. "We go to close a wound. We go to silence a thing that dares to speak with stolen voices." A tightening ran through the ranks. No cheer, only resolve. "You have choice," Thranduil said, and the honesty of it landed like a stone. "The sea calls many of you. The havens are open. No shame lies on those who leave. But if you march with me, know this. The cost is not only blood. The more we bind ourselves to this shore, the harder it becomes to depart." No one stepped out. An archer, woman, scarred, eyes steady, murmured, "Not while the forest is threatened." Others echoed softly, a murmur like leaves in wind. Thranduil nodded once. "Then we go," he said. The forest gate opened with a heavy groan, wood shifting on ancient hinges. Mist poured through like breath. Beyond lay the forest road east, darker, wilder, older than any road of men. The host began to move. No drums, no banners, only the soft sound of many feet on wet earth, the creak of leather, the faint clink of spearheads. Legolas felt the forest shift around them, as if Grenwood itself recognized its children leaving. For a heartbeat he imagined the trees leaning closer, whispering farewells in the slow tongue of leaves. Thranduil rode beside him, eyes forward. "You will ride south," he said quietly. "Tell Aragorn I will not wait." Legolas nodded. "He will worry." "Let him," Thranduil muttered, and there was a bitterness in it that tasted like old grief. "Good kings worry, bad kings do not." Legolas' gaze sharpened. "Then we ensure no bad king rises in the east," he said. Thranduil glanced at him, and pride flickered, brief, reluctant. Then his face hardened again as the road drew them into shadow. Behind them the gate began to close. The sound echoed through the trees like the beginning of a last march. Dawn broke clear after storm, and Minas Tirith gleamed as if scrubbed clean. The air smelled sharp, cold enough to sting. Below the battlements the white tree stood bright, blossoms trembling in the breeze as if ignorant of ash. Aragorn stood with Faramir beside him, looking out over the Pelennor. Fields lay green. Smoke rose from chimneys thin and peaceful. It should have been the smell of a future. A messenger climbed the steps, breathless, and bowed. In his hands was a letter sealed with green wax marked by a leaf. Aragorn broke it at once. As he read, his grip tightened slightly, and the change in his face was enough to make Faramir's chest tighten. "What?" Faramir asked quietly. Aragorn folded the letter with care, as if the words were sharp. "Thranduil marches," he said. Faramir exhaled slowly. "So soon," he murmured. Aragorn nodded. He has seen orcs branded with the crown, he said, and something in dull Guldur touched. He will not wait for men to decide whether fear is justified. Arwen stood a pace behind them, wrapped in a cloak. The wind tugged at her hair. She watched the eastern horizon as though she could see through mountains. If the Woodland realm marches, Faramir said, voice low, others may follow. Lórien, Linden, those who still linger. Aragorn's jaw clenched. And men will feel the old world return, he said. Some will rejoice, some will fear. Both can be dangerous. Arwen stepped forward. Do not resent them, she said softly. Aragorn turned, pain flashing. I do not resent, he said. I fear for them. He glanced toward the trees' blossoms below. And for what we have built. Peace is young. It breaks easily. Peace. Arwen's gaze did not waver. Peace is not the absence of war, she said. It is the work of keeping the world from falling back into the same pit. Her fingers tightened around the stone parapet. If this ashen crown seeks to net the unseen, then it will not stop because men wish it to. Faramir's voice steadied. Then we support Thranduil, he said. Quietly. Rangers, supplies, scouts. We cannot send a great host east without proof, but we can keep him from being alone. Aragorn nodded once. Send word to Éomer, he said. To Dale. To Irbor. And to the havens. He hesitated, then added, if ships must carry wounded. Arwen flinched, almost imperceptibly. Ships meant departure, and departure meant the sea that called to her kind, but not to her chosen mortality. Aragorn saw it and reached for her hand. Do not look at me as if I am already gone, Arwen whispered. His throat tightened. I do not, he lied gently. Arwen squeezed his fingers. I chose this, she said, and pride and sorrow braided in the words. And because I chose it, I will not pretend this does not concern me. If the Elder go to war one last time, then their leaving will cut deeper than any blade. It will be the world's farewell. No. Aragorn stared out over his fields and felt anger rise. Not at her, not at elves, but at the cruel shape of time that demanded payment for every joy. The wind snapped his cloak like a banner, though he carried none. Then we stand, he said quietly, between what was and what must be. Below, blossoms drifted down like pale snow, innocent as prayers. Aragorn watched them fall and wondered how long innocence could survive in a world that had learned the smell of ash. By the time they reached the ridge, the sun was sinking, and the clouds were stained red, too close to the color of old blood. Behind them lay marshland and mist. Ahead stretched the eastern plains, wide, rolling, empty in a way that made emptiness feel like threat rather than peace. Wind tore at cloaks. It carried dust, and beneath dust, a faint smell of smoke that did not belong to any hearth. Elladan stood at the ridge's edge, eyes narrowed. Elrohir stood beside him, posture rigid, one hand resting on his sword as if touch could anchor him to the solid world. Callan had crouched near Scrub, peering from beneath his hood. Baranor's face was pale, his breath too fast. In the distance, a procession moved across the plain. Men in dark cloth, wagons with covered loads, a standard lifted above them, black fabric, and on it, pale as bone, the thorned crown. They moved with steady purpose, not hurried, not fearful, as if the world had been measured and found compliant. There, Elladan murmured. Calenhad's voice was rough. How many? 24 visible, Elladan said. More may be hidden. Elrohir's gaze fixed on one wagon in the center. Men walked around it with a wider space, as if wary. Above it ash drifted, not in a plume like smoke, but falling steadily, like snow. Baranor's breath hitched. Ash, he whispered. But there is no fire. There is, Elrohir said, voice tight. Just not the kind men see. A chant floated on the wind, too far for words to be clear, but rhythmic, deliberate. The sound raised the hairs on Baranor's neck. Calenhad's fingers tightened on his bow. "We could strike," Calenhad whispered. "Take the wagon, Dorti, and loose what we cannot hold?" Elrohir hissed. "If spirits are bound there, you would cut the rope and call it victory." Calenhad's jaw worked, frustrated. "Then what do we do?" Elladan's gaze stayed on the procession. "We follow," he said. "We find the place where they work. Then we cut the chain, not only the link." Baranor swallowed, eyes wide. "What if they sense us?" Elrohir's mouth tightened. "They already do," he said. Elladan felt it, the pressure behind his eyes, faint but unmistakable, like a distant hand resting on the world's throat. The chant shifted, and for a heartbeat he thought he heard his name carried on the wind, tasting it like a cruel joke. He did not move. He did not flinch. He would not give the unseen the satisfaction. The standard bobbed as the procession continued. The thorn crown seemed to darken as the sun bled away. Ash drifted higher now, catching wind and floating toward the ridge. Flecks landed on cloaks, on hair, on bowstrings, cold gray specks against living fabric. Baranor stared at the ash on his sleeve, horror dawning. "It's reaching us," he whispered. Elladan caught a fleck between his fingers. It smeared like soot, cold, weightless, and yet it carried the weight of centuries, the stubborn refusal of evil to die cleanly. "Elves will go to war again," he said quietly, the words tasting like surrender and vow at once. Elrohir's eyes flashed, bright with fierce resolve. "One last time," he said. Elladan looked west in his mind, toward Minas Tirith's white stone and fragile blossoms, toward Ithilien's tender green, toward Grenwood's silent mustering, toward Lórien's fading gold, and the gray piers of the havens where ships waited like held breath. Then he turned his gaze east again. "Follow," he whispered. The rangers shifted, silent as prayer. Callan had set his face like stone. Baranor pulled his cloak tighter as if cloth could keep dread from sinking into bone. Together they slipped down the far side of the ridge into gathering dark, trailing the procession that carried ash like snow and a symbol like a promise, while above them the first stars pricked through, cold, constant, indifferent, watching another age begin to fracture.